Cardinal tasked by Pope Francis to try to help end the war in Ukraine is visiting Kyiv. Matteo Zuppi is on a two-day visit to the Ukrainian capital. Since the war started in February 2022, Francis and the Vatican have tried to offer themselves as possible peace brokers, but to date their efforts have not been successful. Zuppi is from a Rome-based peace group. In 1992, the organization brokered a deal that ended the civil war in Mozambique, which had killed about 1 million people and displaced about 4 million. We can now speak to Arise chief correspondent John Cookson, who is back in London after reporting from Ukraine for the past 2 weeks. Good to see that you're back, John. Please, let's start off by asking the things you've learned about the Ukraine's counteroffensive so far.
Hey, Solomon, good to see you. Well, it looks like this long-awaited counteroffensive is underway. We always thought it was going to be a quiet one in the sense that it was not going to be on a massive scale that we've seen in previous world wars, for example, because simply the Ukrainians don't have the firepower, they don't have the manpower to launch that kind of assault, to oust the Russians totally in one go from the land that they occupy in Ukraine, which is about a fifth of the country if you include Crimea. So what I think we're seeing already and we'll see in the coming weeks and months is Ukraine trying to punch a hole in Russian defenses, say 15 kilometers wide. And then having done that, they must hold that ground, which is quite honestly the harder part of this kind of operation. It seems, if we believe what the Russians are saying, that they tried on Sunday in Donetsk, and the Russians crushed the onslaught, as it were, killing the Russians, say, 250 Ukrainian soldiers. So it seems that the first attempt to do this may have failed. I say may because the Ukrainians are saying nothing. The Russians are putting out their side of the story, and we know from previous experience of the Russians that they don't always tell the truth, so we'll have to wait and see what the final result of all this is. So, as I say, I think we can see more of this happening in the coming weeks and months. There's reports tonight that the Ukrainians are pushing to Bakhmut, which the Russians claim to have seized a couple of weeks ago. And across the border, also in Russia, some irregular troops, Russians loyal to the Ukrainian government, seem to be continuing their action, their sabotage action and bombing action in the Belgorod region, which has been the site of a lot of attacks in the last 2 weeks. So I think we're seeing the first stirrings of a counteroffensive. It's too early to say where this is all going, but as I say, we'll see the result in the coming weeks and months.
Now, while we wait to see what happens next, the UK's Foreign Secretary is in Kyiv meeting Zelenskyy. What can that get-together be all about?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Britain's top diplomat in Kyiv. He's been there before and follows on the heels of British Prime Minister and also Defence Secretary recently in Kyiv. You hinted at some of the subjects as you headlined the story earlier. We can say that they would have talked about Ukraine's accession or non-accession to NATO, which will be the subject of a big discussion when NATO meets next month in Vilnius to discuss whether Ukraine should be admitted to NATO. Cleverly would have told Zelenskyy that nothing's going to happen, and whilst the country is at war, although Britain would support Ukraine's admission to NATO in due course. They would have talked about Ukraine's peace proposal, which basically is quite simple, really, that the Russians have to pull out of all occupied territory, including Crimea. And also they would have talked about reparations and reconstruction of Ukraine once this terrible war is over. It's going to cost trillions and trillions of dollars to get Ukraine back on its feet, such as the destruction in the country, to infrastructure and to, like just life in general, to hospitals and other infrastructure in the country, into power stations, and it really will be a mammoth task. And I'm thinking that because the British government has supported Ukraine very much militarily, it will be looking in the future to securing some decent contracts for Ukraine's reconstruction when this war is over.
And John, the Pope has sent one of his top cardinals to Kyiv. Could these herald a possible papal visit?
Maybe. I think they're laying the groundwork. The Pope, Zelenskyy had an audience with the Pope recently in the Vatican, and the Pope has said that he would like to go to Ukraine, but on condition that he goes to Russia too. The Pope, very keen not to take sides in this, even though he might wish to. So that's a precondition of any papal visit to Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, a third of the people who live there are Catholic. So to have the Pope visit would be an amazing experience for Ukrainian people. When you visit Ukraine, you realize that it's a deeply religious country. There's a high attendance at church, and the Catholic faith is very well followed in Ukraine. So it will be a massive morale boost for Ukrainian people to have the Pope visit. But as I say, the Pope has to secure a similar visit to Russia before he'll entertain going to Ukraine.
I don't know if we can do this in less than a minute. You've just returned to London from a 2-week assignment to Ukraine. So what's your impression of the conflict so far?
People are weary. Of course they are. After 15 months of war, every Ukrainian family is tired, and they want things to end. That said, there's determination there which is firing them up all the time. They don't see defeat as a possibility. The other thing I would say is that for the first time, and the Ukrainians never talk about how many soldiers have been killed, when you talk to families now, they either have lost a relative or they know someone who has lost a relative in this conflict, which to me is a new development.
John Cookson, many thanks for your time.